Good morning. Welcome to week 6 of Elementary Social Studies Methods. I wanted to share with you today an example of a lesson that I'm particularly proud of. I found this idea years ago when searching through primary sources, and I had been reading about historical inquiry, and I wanted to make my lessons engaging, but I needed to get the students involved in reading sources, primary sources. Now, again, we have to remember the distinction between primary and secondary, right? And now that we know the difference between primary and secondary, and that's something that you're going to be teaching students too. And what we have to recognize and realize is that sometimes primary sources aren't just reading an old letter. They can be reading a newspaper. They can be reading diaries. They can be examining an old artifact. They can be examining an old object from a family member or from a long time ago, and it can be examining a picture, a painting, a famous drawing, anything. So a primary source really is anything from the time period of study. And I wanted to find some way to make the early 1800s engaging for my students, because quite frankly, from a historical perspective, from a history teacher, that is a really hard time period to study with kids, is the early 1800s, because people like the wars and kids like westward expansion and Oregon Trail, and that's coming up. But this is a difficult time to study, but it's very, very important in how it shaped our country. And one of the things that I did was I came across these two pictures. Now here's how I would use this. I'm going to lay a little context before doing the lesson with you, and I say doing the lesson, it'd be short, okay? The context would be, we've started a unit on the early 1800s. We're looking at the interaction between different groups of people in the country. Okay, and I use this lesson to introduce a unit. So sometimes I use the analyzing of primary sources to introduce a concept, to reinforce a concept, or to summarize a concept. Those are the three different ways that I like to use sources. And this one would be to introduce students to a particular unit. So here's what we would do. I would first put these pictures up for students. And the questions that I always ask students is this, and this is why. I always ask, what do you notice? From the littlest child to a doctoral student, anyone and everyone can simply look at something and notice. Now, if you were to start with jargon that would be above kids' heads, like, okay, kids, today we are going to analyze, synthesize these two photos, these two primary sources. They're not going to get that. That's above their head. So let's take all kids with us and let's ask questions that they can all come along with us. And we're going to slowly drive them deeper. So first, what do you notice? And I always started with the picture on the left and then the picture on the right. And we're asking for anything and everything from kids. So what do you notice about the picture on the left? Kids will say, it's in color. Yeah, you're right. That's great. What else do you notice? And then they'll point out all different things. So look at his hair. It's like, yeah, he's got wonderful black slick back hair, right? Kind of like their teacher. He's got a bow tie on. He's in a high back chair. He's sitting very proper. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we do see that. What else do you notice? He's got stuff on his desk. Oh, he does. So what do you think that means? Maybe he's writing. That could be. What else do you see? He's in fancy clothes. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Now, what do you notice about the picture on the right? So we slowly talk about the picture. We ask them, first we're asking what we notice. Then what you can do to drive them deeper, okay, through the historical inquiry process. We've asked them what they notice. Now let's ask them what they think some of these things mean. What do you think they're trying to show us with this picture on the left? He's important. Well, what makes you say that he's important? He's dressed really fancy. Okay, so he's dressed nicely. He doesn't look like he's dressed poor. Like he's from poverty. He's got stuff on us, so he knows how to write. Yeah, you're right. And then you can talk to kids about how sometimes when you see books and writing and letters and paintings, that usually symbolizes knowledge and learning. Then we look at the picture on the right. We do the same thing. What do you notice? It's in black and white. Yeah, you're right. It is. Great, great. And now what you're doing is instead of saying to kids this ambiguous, let's compare and contrast, kids don't always understand. That can be an abstract concept to kids. So now, without even mentioning compare and contrast, we're beginning to compare and contrast. We're saying, it's in black and white. The other one's in color. You're right. That's a contrast between the two. What else do you notice? He's wearing a bow tie. Yeah, you're right. And you notice how I'm over exaggerating the responses. It's because sometimes kids, the silliest thing can really set kids up to be excited about something, and so it's interesting how even just changing up your lesson, bringing in a different strategy. Now, I'm not saying you can do a pick comparison, every week, because right, you can't do that. But this is just one more tool in your pedagogical toolbox that you can pull from when you need to. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to add more tools to your teaching toolbox. So you compare again on the right. He's dressed in bow tie. You're right. Books, knowledge, stuff in the background, fancy chair. Okay, you're right. Now, here's where we take him deeper. What do you think is being said in this picture? Or another way to ask that, that would be confusing maybe to littler kids, to elementary kids. You could say, why do you think this painting or was done? That's a great question. That's a really deep question. And you're going to get responses from all over the place. And the key is to always accept and try to take a kid's answer rather than saying, no, I don't think so. You need to always acknowledge every answer that was given. Where I went to undergrad, there was a professor. His name was Dr. Rice. He was in the history department. One of the most brilliant people that I've ever met in my life. Dr. Rice was 100% blind. He was born, he was able to see. He had an accident to his head, lost his vision. Walked to campus every day. If you walk by him on campus, you could hear him counting. He would count the steps. He had everything memorized in his head for steps, and he had his walking stick, and he would do that. It was unbelievable. And Dr. Rice had a way of acknowledging every answer that every student gave. In fact, he was so good at it. He was so good at validating everything that people said. The education department at my college actually invented their own term, like scaffolding or schema or all that the educational stuff that you're learning in your classes. They invented a term, and it was called ricing. Ricing is the ability to take every answer and somehow find a way to acknowledge that student's answer, the response, so that every kid feels like I have something to offer and that I'm not afraid to guess, even if it might be wrong. And so I would encourage you to think about this. Even though you don't know Dr. Rice, I want to encourage you to think of a teacher who had an ability to take an answer and say, yeah, we might not quite be there, but they had a way of doing it very tactfully. So always accepting answers, especially when you're beginning to experiment with different types of strategies and teaching kids historical inquiry. That's called ricing. Tuck that one away. Remember that one. So now we're going to look at, and we've compared and contrasted. We see that they're both dressed similar. There are some differences. There are some similarities. And now here's the bombshell, ladies and gentlemen. Here we go. This is my favorite part of the lesson. We start to guess. Who do you think these people are? Well, they're obviously really important because we talked about clothes, the background, etc. Then I'd always ask, does anyone know who they are? And very, very perceptive students might recognize the person on the right. Do you know? It's Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is on the right. Andrew Jackson is the guy on the $20 bill. So this is President Andrew Jackson. Now here's the kicker, ladies and gentlemen. I love this part. Who's the person on the left? The person on the left, ladies and gentlemen, is the chief of the Cherokee Nation in the 1820s and 1830s. His name was John Ross. I'm going to say that again. The picture on the left is the chief of the Cherokee Nation in the 1820s and 30s. Now, Andrew Jackson is the one who kicked all the Indians out, the Cherokee, along the Trail of Tears through the Indian Removal Act. And you're going to get to all of that with your kids. But what I want them to see first is that the Cherokee did everything that they could to try to be white for the American government, and they were still mistreated. That's the bombshell. This is an example of historical inquiry using primary sources, because pictures are primary sources, but making it discrepant in that we're leaving key information out until the kicker, the bombshell at the end, where you make kids realize that this was a Native American who was doing everything he could to try to be like a white American, and they were still mistreated. That, ladies and gentlemen, is historical inquiry. That is the beauty of taking kids with you on the journey to teaching them how to analyze primary sources, while making it mysterious, making it visually discrepant, but also making it engaging. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you later. Have a great week.